A point of view on racism with Dr. Mary Frances Berry, up next on Evening Exchange. Welcome to Evening Exchange. I'm Junette Pinkney. Kojo Namdi has the evening off. All this week, we've been exploring the new face of racism in the United States with noted members of the African American community. On Tuesday, we talked with Dr. Francis Welsing, the author of The Crest Theory on Color Confrontation. Yesterday, the Reverend Jesse Jackson was our guest, and tonight we are joined by national and international civil rights leader Mary Frances Berry. Before we start our conversation, I want to let you know that we will be taking your phone calls in the last segment of the show. Dr. Berry, welcome to Evening Exchange.
Well, thank you very much, Junette.
I want to start with you, as we have started with our other guests, asking what your definition of racism is.
Well, it has, of course, many definitions. That's not a cop-out, but there are many definitions. But it essentially means, in the context that we're talking, an attitude that someone else is inferior and without any objective evidence to prove that this is the case, and treating people as if they are inferior, which also means that you must have the power to determine what happens to them, because otherwise, if you have no power, it doesn't matter that you engage in behavior toward them which keeps them subordinated. So it's assuming people are inferior and being in the position to act in such a way to their detriment.
So I would take it from your definition that you believe people of color, people who are in the oppressed group, cannot be racist?
People who are in the oppressed group can have racist attitudes, and they could wish that they could do something to somebody else, but it's very difficult most of the time to be able to exercise that instinct. So we can have racist attitudes, most human beings do, but in point of fact, I'm talking about power too, which is in the equation.
And I asked you that question because we had a caller last night, a black woman called and said that she had been treated in a racist manner by black people as well as by white, and I asked her what she meant by a racist manner. Reverend Jackson said that it had to do with meanness, with violence, that sort of thing in terms of attitude and behavior, but I wasn't sure that that actually equaled racism.
But I think when you start calling everything racism, meanness racism, violence racism, no matter who perpetrates it, then what you do is dilute the definition so much that nobody can figure out what it is you're talking about. So it's ascribing people because you think they're inferior, that they belong to a group of people who you believe are inferior to you, and that you're in the position to do something about that.
Do you think that racism will ever be eradicated?
I do not believe that racist attitudes or behavior will be eradicated in my lifetime. I used to think so when I was young and naive. I've learned better over time. The most important thing about it is to assume that it's there and then to figure out what to do with it. As far as African Americans are concerned, because of the way we came to this country, and because of images of Africa that are in people's minds and images of us that are in people's minds, including our own minds, you have a perpetuation of this kind of attitude and behavior. And the first thing anybody wants to do, any group of people, when they come to the United States, is to make sure they distance themselves as much as possible from being thought of as African Americans.
You say you don't think it will be eradicated in your lifetime. Does that mean you believe that it will at some point?
I have no idea what will happen after I'm dead and gone. I'm just saying that I know, I have no hope that it will be, and I think it's unlikely, given human nature and given what happens and given what we know about power and the power of ideas and behavior, that it will happen. It's something that will always sort of be there in the equation.
What's your view of what the origins then of racism are? If you believe it will always be there, there's some reason you think that way.
The origins of racism, historians, putting on my historian's hat, tell us about those of us who are in the United States, African American people, because we were brought here as slaves, okay? The way we came, as inferiors, subjugated, treated as inferiors, having color associated with our condition, which meant that in the minds of white folk, we were the inferior class, and that ascription, that subordination, got to be part of the definition of us. And then after that, of course, you have Jim Crow and a continued history of subordination, which has never ended. So it's constantly in everybody's mind. It's in our minds because it's in everybody else's minds, and it has been an idea that has been pursued from the beginning. It has staying power.
Asking you to keep on that historian's hat, do you see that we are now returning to the time of the black codes, the post-Reconstruction period, given the way that the Supreme Court has been
Well,
moving?
even though no period of history is exactly like any other, historians always have to tell you that before they say history teaches. That having
History
said that,
teaches.
let me just say that what we're in is a period like the late 19th century after the overthrow of Reconstruction, which occurred. The Supreme Court now is controlled by people who have the kinds of attitudes and make the kinds of decisions toward us which are not healthy and will likely perpetuate insofar as possible the status that we're in. We don't have a national administration that supports us in our quest by and large. That's like the analogous to the late 19th century. The mood of the country is sort of, let's forget about this, except with a brief sort of paroxysm of interest when there's a riot or something like that. And so in many ways, it's analogous to the late 19th century. There are differences, though. We're smarter, more of us illiterate, the differences in communication, and so we're not the same people we were then, and neither are other people, and the conditions are not the same, but there are similarities.
When we talk about the Supreme Court, not to digress too far, but the presence on the Supreme Court of of only one African American and having that person be in the form of Clarence Thomas, I mean, what do you think that says about us as a people, and what does that bode for us as a people?
Well, what it says is that we chose, those of us who supported Thomas, and I wasn't one of them, but those African Americans who support him chose color over character, which we should never do. We ought to be smart enough by now that our race history is that just because someone is black, that doesn't mean that they will be in favor of what the majority of us regard as our interests. Having someone on the court means that that's a difference from the late 19th century, because we didn't have anybody on the court then. Having someone on the court that has those views after all this time and after all that has taken place means that in a sense we're going backwards instead of going forward.
At this time, give this video a like. And also, are you in favor of Clarence Thomas? Let me know in the comments.
That's dangerous. That's an important sign.
Do you see his presence as, do you think that his presence will be used to justify the movement of the court? Not that he alone can make decisions, but will they use his presence and his acquiescence or assent to say, well, it must be okay with black people, our black person agrees with us?
Well, it's kind of tough now because there are a lot of people black folks who supported Thomas who now every time I see them they duck their heads and they forgot that they supported him and they say, well, are you sure I supported him? And if I did, I apologize. I didn't know what the dude would do. I couldn't believe it, that kind of thing. But it is indeed true that people who do not wish us well in our quest to overcome racism and supported him might think that it's great that the fact that he's there ratifies whatever's done, and then it can be explained to us. It just depends on how smart we are. We can simply say that we repudiate everything he stands for, and it won't do us any good. We can't get him off the court, but at least we can make it clear that he doesn't speak for us.
Let's talk for a little bit about Los Angeles, because a moment ago you referred to the country sort of wanting to forget about civil rights until there is a riot.
Yeah, you know what I think is the most interesting thing about this racism and the civil rights agenda that I've been thinking? The other day, Clarence Page, who's a columnist with the Chicago paper, I was reading an article he'd written and questioned him about it at a commission hearing, and he'd said that during the civil rights agenda, the ascendancy of the civil rights agenda over the last few years, the condition of African Americans had gotten worse in the country, okay? I pointed out to him that the civil rights agenda, the struggle against racism, has not been in ascendancy, not for the last 12 years anywhere I've been in this country. And in the last 12 years, the condition of African Americans has gotten much worse. And the condition of African Americans before that 12-year period had gotten a lot better. Certainly wasn't perfect, certainly a lot of problems, but indeed, when the struggle against racism, when we recede in paying attention to that struggle, we reap the whirlwind and a lot of things going sour and a lot of bad things happening to people. And what happened in Los Angeles is just one example of those bad things happening.
And when you talk about us receding and not paying close enough attention to that struggle, is that we African Americans, is that we Americans, black and white people of goodwill? Who are you saying
Well,
has
it's
not paid
Americans
attention?
in general. That's one we. But we, as African Americans, have a special responsibility, I would think, to be concerned about ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the problem with racism and being in a society where you are considered as an inferior caste, as it were, is that psychologically, I'm told, some people get in a position where they want to distance themselves from themselves, if I may put it that way. And it's very painful to have to think all the time about the predicament we're in. One of my nephews said that to me. I said, son, I said to him, you know, that could have happened to you, what happened out there to Rodney King. You should be careful. He's a young engineer. You should be careful when you walk around. Notice where you're going, what you're doing, you know. And he was telling me about some policeman stopping him and how he told him he didn't need to stop. I said, look, you cannot do this. He said, well, it's too painful to have to think about that all the time. Well, as long as you're black and in America, you have to think about that all the time. And a lot of us, a lot of people in the African American community had tried to get away from that pain, and trying to get away from that pain so that they don't have to think about it. They don't have to think about the struggle. And then one way to do it is, we've heard for the last few years, you folks blame racism for everything. Well, I don't know anybody who blames it for everything. And let it be clearly understood, I don't blame it for everything, but it's not something that we can forget about.
Do you think that racism is sometimes used by us as an excuse?
Oh, absolutely. There are people who, you see politicians, for example, there have been a whole, you know, train of them who did something and got their hand caught in the cookie jar or some other jar, I won't say which. And the first response they give is, you know, these people racist after me, and, you know, they're just doing this. And I do not doubt that there are folk who like to prosecute black elected officials. I do not doubt that there are people who are after them. But what I've always said is, you should assume in this society that somebody's after you. You should behave as if somebody's after you all the time if you are in a highly visible position, because when you're in the limelight, you make a good target. And so if you get caught with your hand in the jar, then scream that you were stupid not to take into account. Don't scream. Every African American has to confront racism, so you can't just use that as an excuse for nefarious behavior.
You know, when you talked a moment ago about the pervasiveness of racism, it made me recall my trip to West Africa, where for the first time when I saw black airline pilots, black bank tellers, black everything, people running the countries that I visited, for the first time I realized what a cloud we carry with us here in this country. Because for the first time, while things might have been moving slowly and not going the way I would have liked them to, for a variety of reasons, one of those reasons I knew was not because of my skin color. And it was only in leaving the country that I could become aware of how pervasive and oppressive the racism here is.
Yeah, because there are all kinds of reasons for things to happen. There are class reasons for things happening. There are reasons that somebody doesn't like the kind of shoes somebody wears, the way they talk. There are all kinds of reasons. But with us, it's not wrong to always indulge in a presumption, at least, that racism probably had something to do with it. Now, we've got a few, you know, airline pilots around here. We got one or two, you see them here and there, and we get a few people in these positions. But I say to white students when I go to talk to them on campuses and making speeches and talking to them, I say, how would you like it if every class when you went to class, every one of your teachers was black? How would you like that? You're saying, you know, you don't understand why black students want more African American faculty and all that kind of. If you want to know what racism feels like, pretend that every teacher you had and every class you went to, you were the only white person, and there were all these black. How would you feel about that? Well, the short answer is they didn't feel very good.
I want to talk a little more about Los Angeles and whether you think it's just going to blow over, what you think the results of that explosion
I think what
will be.
happens as a result of Los Angeles depends on what we do as African American people. And I haven't seen we doing very much about it, as a matter of fact. If we were mobilized to insist that something be done, there ought to be people out demonstrating like we did when we were picketing the South African embassy around South Africa. There ought to be people out every day saying, do something about the situation.
And where should
and we
that
ought
be
to
happening?
be meeting ourselves about what to do, both locally in Los Angeles and in a national kind of movement to do something about the cities. I mean, I was at the Save Our Cities March, and there were a lot of folks I know who weren't there, you see. So we should be doing something. I think that the electorate, those people who go vote, most of whom are white folk and folks who are, on the Republican agenda or whatever it is. I think that they would like to simply forget about what happened, sweep it under the rug, have the Senate and the House pass this Band-Aid bill that they're talking about, legislation, which really isn't going to do very much about the problem, and then have everybody go away and think about something else.
You just said that there were a lot of folks you know who were not at the Save Our Cities March, who presumably you would expect to be there or think should be there. Does that mean that we're not taking the responsibility that we should? Are we sitting back waiting for an administration that we know does not love us to do something for us, to heal a wound that they have inflicted?
Well, we don't understand that yet, that it's the squeaky wheel that gets the oil. Throughout the history of our being here in the United States, whenever a major change has occurred to improve our situation, it has come as a result of our doing something, some kind of action on our part. Frederick Douglass said it, power concedes nothing without a demand. And we keep forgetting that over and over and over again, and we lament and we wring our hands, as we've all been doing since the Rodney King thing. People have been wringing. If I've seen one group of people wringing their hands, I've seen hundreds and thousands lamenting this. But what we need to do is be about the business of a movement to try to do something about it, both within the community and in terms of demanding our fair share of the public policy decisions that are made in this country too.
So I want to ask you to speak to our viewers who are individual people in the Washington area watching. What is it that these individual people who are not elected officials or commissioners or anything of that nature, what is it they can do to make a difference in our condition?
What I say is, sure, there's the big picture. There's always going to be the big picture, and there are things like voting and supporting organizations and that kind of thing. But everybody should every day commit themselves to do at least one thing, whatever that one thing is.
Give some
if you're not
examples.
tutoring a child, go tutor one. Find some children and go and tutor them if you're not doing that. And don't say you don't have time. If I have time, you have time. If you don't want to do that, go and mobilize some kind of movement to help get drugs out of some particular neighborhood. People say, well, if we get it out of that neighborhood, it'll run to the next neighborhood. Well, if we have some people mobilized in every neighborhood, then it can run from here to there. Go and try to do that. Go and try to take some kids on a trip somewhere, out of the city somewhere, to do something interesting. I mean, there are things that people can do themselves. Try to motivate some students who don't know where you go to find out about money to go to college. Go and work with them and do that. Find some group of people who you can do something for using your skills and your talents, and you do something. And now, whenever I say this to people, they say, well, but it's not going to change the big picture. Well, it may not change the entire big picture. And I think in big policy terms. Go do that too. But if everybody would just do something every day and would remember to do it every day, we would get some incremental change on the situation.
One of the things I know you've done is be involved with South Africa and the anti-apartheid movement. When we come back, we're going to talk about that some. Stay tuned for more with Dr. Mary Frances Berry.
Who would you like for me to do a video on next? What are your thoughts about this video? Please share them in the comments. Please be honest when answering these questions. Share this video with anyone you deem necessary. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel.